Today is the start of a brand new series in which we're going to be talking about all the vitamins and all the minerals that are necessary to human life, what they do in the body, what their structure is, what happens if you don't get enough of them, how much you need, absolutely everything. We're going to cover the whole lot, but to start with, we need to talk about what a vitamin actually is. Now, originally, when they're first being discovered, people thought that all the vitamins contained a carbon attached to a nitrogen, or in chemical terms, an amide bond. All the ones that have been discovered to that point did. Then they shortened it down, thanks to a chap called Jack Thrummond. He decided to shorten down from vitylamine to vitamin, and even though we found afterwards that not all of them actually have amide bonds, the name sort of stuck. Two chaps, a Polish biochemist called Casimir Funk, which is perhaps the best name in all of science, and a Japanese chap called Umitaro Suzuki. Unfortunately, Casimir sort of gets most of the credit because he was the first person to publish it in a European language. He published his first paper on what would then become known as vitamins in 1912. Mr. Suzuki did it in 1910, but unfortunately, he was publishing in Japanese. When it was eventually translated into German, there was some sort of mistranslation, there was a mistake, and his report on this new pellagra preventing substance, which is the same one that Funk would discover 2 years later, in the German translation it didn't actually mention that it was a new substance that they'd isolated from brown rice. So Mr. Funk unfortunately got most of the credit, but now we know differently, so hard luck, Mr. Suzuki. So vitamins are all compounds which are necessary to human life. Without them, you might last for a few days or a few months, depending on which one, but eventually all the systems inside you just pack up and go, and then you're done. They are essential, which in nutritional terms means that it's a substance that can't be produced inside the human body. So, great example, vitamin C, or ascorbic acid, is essential for humans, because we can't produce it ourselves. Birds and lizards and a few other animals can produce it inside their own bodies. So for them, vitamin C is not an essential vitamin. So lucky old birds. So the first one we're going to look at is vitamin A. Now, vitamin A structurally looks like a long chain of carbon atoms with a cyclohexene ring at one end. There should be something up on the screen now to show what it looks like. There's a couple of other forms, because we can get vitamin A from provitamin A, which is the structure you see now, or we can get it from beta-carotene, which looks a bit like that one, but instead of having one cyclohexene ring, it's got one at each end, or other carotenoids, which also have a cyclohexene at just one end. Now, for every milligram of provitamin A, to get the same amount of effect, you'd need 6 milligrams of beta-carotene or 12 milligrams of another carotenoid. So the body goes through a series of processes to turn the precursor to vitamin A, the version that we find in our diet, into the version that we need inside our cells. Now, vitamin A gets turned into one of 3 things. There's retinol and retinal, which are very, very similar to each other. The only difference is that one is an alcohol and the other is an aldehyde. If you're studying chemistry at A-level or GCSE, or high school or whatever, that might be something you're familiar with. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter. It's just nice to know that they are 2 different molecules, and there is a bit of a difference there. They can be freely converted into each other back and forth. So if your body doesn't got enough retinol, but it's got loads of retinal, it goes, right, we'll reduce some of that, and we'll get back to retinol until you've got enough of each. What you can't do is change the 3rd form back to that, because retinoic acid, once it's been made inside the body, you can't then go back to retinol and retinal. So that's stuck like that. Now, vitamin A, like all other vitamins, has loads of roles inside the body, and we're always discovering new ones, which is one of the most exciting things about nutrition. There's always something we haven't found out yet. So we're going to talk today about vitamin A in vision, in growth and development, and in the immune system. So inside your eyes, there's 2 kinds of cells that are responsible for responding to light. There's the cone cells, which are shaped like cones, and they sort of live in the centre of the eye, and their job is to detect colour. So if you try and look around you now, what you'll notice is that colours that are right in front of you appear much more vibrant than stuff that's sort of at the edge of your peripheral vision. The trouble with that is if you try to look at your peripheral vision to check, then your eyes move and you're then staring at the middle of your vision. So it's quite hard to check, but it is there. The other ones, the rod cells, they live around the edges of your eyes. They're responsible for your low light vision. So what happens there is there's a form of retinal, 11-cis retinal. It's called 11-cis because there's a carbon double bond on the 11th carbon that causes it to change shape slightly. And that binds onto a molecule called opsin, which lives inside the rod cells. Now what happens is that once you've got those two components together, you have rhodopsin. And rhodopsin lives inside the rod cells, and when it's exposed to light coming into your eyes, it starts to break down. First it's magenta, and then it's orange, and then it's yellow, and as it becomes completely white, at that point the rhodopsin has broken down into opsin and all trans retinal, so because it's changed shape, it can't fit back on. So what has to happen is that the all trans retinal gets taken into the retinal pigment tissue. It gets regenerated back into 11 trans retinal, so it can then be attached onto a new molecule of opsin. And the cycle continues. Now, as with all biological processes, that cycle isn't 100% perfect. So what happens is that some of that retinal gets lost over time, it breaks down, is needed elsewhere in the body, so that's why we need a constant supply of retinal and in the form of vitamin A for our diet. Now, one interesting historical note is that in World War II, the British Armed Services worked out radar, which was the way they were able to tell that German fighters were coming from such and such a position that arrive over here somewhere, and so they knew when to send fighters up. Now, to try and trick the Germans into thinking that they didn't have any sort of secret weapon, it was all just down to eyesight, the Ministry for Food put out lots of messages saying, our fighter pilots are eating lots of carrots, because people knew what vitamin A was. So they said, well, that's why they've got such fantastic eyesight. Now, if you're not getting enough vitamin A in your diet, what will happen is as that 11 cis retinal gets converted back into all trans retinal in the retinal pigment tissue, it'll keep going round and round, and steadily over time, that supply of vitamin A that's available for the eyes will be reduced further and further, and so your rod cells will become less and less able to respond to light, and so your low light vision will get worse and worse and worse until you eventually get night blindness, where below a certain level of light in the atmosphere, in the environment, you aren't able to see a thing. Vitamin A also has quite a lot of roles to play in growth and development, even before you're born. One study found that there was about 30% of the eggs that were formed inside embryos that were inside mothers who weren't getting enough vitamin A. Only that 30% of the eggs, the ova, were actually fertile. So even before you're born, your vitamin A status can affect how fertile you will be in the future. On a similar note, the first step of going from a stem cell into a sperm cell, the process that we go through in the test tube to produce sperm, that first step actually requires vitamin A to be present. If it isn't, you don't produce any sperm. In mice, several studies have found that if you give mice a diet that doesn't contain enough vitamin A, one of the things that happens to them is a shrinkage of the testes, which is perhaps the best advert for any reason to eat your carrots I've ever heard. Other things that happen in mice, By the way, the reason that scientists seem to be picking on the mice so often isn't because, as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says, they're super intelligent beings who are plotting to take over the world. It's actually because mice are quite a lot like humans. Apart from the fact that they're hairy and small, they're basically the same as us. A lot of scientists have done a huge number of studies over the last 100 years into what happens when you take mice and you don't give them enough vitamin A in development of the fetus. Firstly, what happens is that a lot of eggs fail to implant into the lining of the uterus. So even if they're fertilised, they don't start. If they do manage to implant, start to develop, and then vitamin A status goes down, spontaneous miscarriages and reabsorptions of the fetus occur. If the mice still get past that stage, there's all sorts of problems. Lots of the organs fail to develop properly. The hind brain, for example, that's the part of the brain right at the back that covers all the basics, breathing, keeping your heart going. That part of the brain fails to develop because that part of the brain doesn't develop. The rest just doesn't. It has to go in a certain order. The heart fails to develop properly. The spine, in one study I remember, which is quite harrowing, is there was significant curvature of the spine in such a way that the mice were basically S-shaped with their pelvis over here and the head up here. In such a state just isn't compatible with life. Organs that fail to develop include the eyes, ironically enough, and the kidneys in cases where there isn't enough vitamin A. On the other end, an excess of retinoic acid, so if you're getting too much vitamin A and too much of it converted into retinoic acid, causes issues in the development of the skeleton. One of the symptoms of vitamin A deficiency is, in technical terms, called keratosis. What that basically means is dryness of the eyes. What happens there is that the mucus producing cells in your eyes and in your airways and inside your digestive tract, they require vitamin A in order to be produced. So what happens is if those cells aren't being produced and they start dying off, you're getting less mucus being produced to protect the eye, so you start getting dryness of the eye, start getting irritability of the eye, and something called Beteaux spots. Because if these mucus producing cells aren't available, for some reason the body defaults to producing keratin producing cells. Keratin is stuff that your skin and your fingernails and your hair are made of. So you're then getting these sort of itchy skin type patches being formed inside the eye, which can be seen when you shine a light into the eye of someone with vitamin A deficiency, what are called Beteaux spots. It also affects if your airways haven't got mucus-producing cells, then any bacteria that get down there won't be able to be trapped inside that mucus, and so they'll be able to have a jolly old time inside your lungs. So you get things like pneumonia, you get infections, not a good time. And similarly, you do need a lot of mucus inside your gut to keep things moving along and to protect your gut. So without those mucus-producing cells, a whole load of problems are going to come. In particular, inside the colon or the intestine, when you don't have enough vitamin A, a certain immune cell called a macrophage, which is a cell whose job is to engulf and sort of gobble up any bacteria or viruses or foreign particles, those cells just don't get produced. So that then can be associated with increased risk of cancer, increased risk of bacteriological infection. It's not good news. Reduced vitamin A status is associated with cancer, with loss of eyesight, with skin infections, all bad news. Now, you may have heard stories about polar explorers eating polar bear. So the rough gist of it is that when polar explorers went up to the North Pole, saw a polar bear, shot it and ate it, they became very, very ill. The reason is, obviously because they're at the pole, they've got to eat everything, so they eat the liver, and the liver of a polar bear is really, really, really densely packed with vitamin A, because that's where vitamin A is stored in mammals. The problem is that when you eat amounts of up to, say, 1,000 milligrams per day and above, that's a poisonous level. So then you start getting things like nausea, confusion, brain functions start to decline, diarrhea, and eventually you die. Obviously, we know much better now. Only eat polar bear livers in very spare amounts. The sources of vitamin A you should be looking at are milks, cheese, butter, because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. There's also plant sources, so dark leafy greens are usually a pretty good source. You need somewhere between 600 to 800 micrograms per. So there you have it, vitamin A. Good for eyesight, good for mucus, bad for polar explorers. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you have any comments, questions or queries, please leave them down in the comments section. If you enjoyed this, please do give the video a like, as it really does help. And I look forward to speaking to you all again very, very soon. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.